Hi, everybody. This is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It is Tuesday, September 3rd today, and I'm doing a live cast this evening. And I'm going to be doing a little bit of a planetary update, tell you about what's going on in the sky right now. And then I will open it up to questions and answers, which I haven't done for a while. I've had a backup of questions and answers in my inbox for months now, actually. And I decided what I would do is try to answer some of those questions live or take questions from all of you. The only kinds of questions that I don't want to take are elaborate questions about personal birth charts. So if you have more general questions about astrology, any kind of a question whatsoever about astrology, whether it's philosophical or if it's technical, if you want to know something about how to read a planet in a certain sign or a certain house, whatever questions you might have tonight, I'm dedicating a good portion of this evening's live cast to answering your questions. So go ahead and put them in the chat box if you've got them. Lovely to see some of you guys saying hello already. Hi. Let's talk first about what's going on in the sky before we do any Q&A. So a couple of the major events of the day include Mercury passing through conjunction with Mars. Just after Mars is exiting a conjunction with the Sun, which means that Mercury is heading right into the conjunction with the Sun as well. That actually makes Mercury Cazimi right now, which means that Mercury is actually at the heart of the Sun. And this is following right after Mars being at the heart of the Sun. Mars Cazimi is just now fading. So that's kind of a unique thing to see two planets moving through Cazimi with the Sun simultaneously. That's interesting. So what can you expect and what can you look for, or what might you have already experienced in the past couple of days? Well, first of all, this is the exaltation and the domicile of Mercury, Virgo. So whenever you have a bunch of planets in any house, the simplest thing to do is to start off by imagining that they're literally all hanging out at someone's house. And whose house is it, and what is that house like? So with Virgo, we're thinking about Mercury's house, and not just Mercury has two houses. Gemini is Mercury's other house. So then we're thinking of, well, what kind of house is what kind of hangout spot is this for Mercury? So this is Mercury's double-bodied, earthy, feminine hangout spot. So when you're thinking about that, another word that you can use for the feminine is yin. If you're familiar with the distinction between yin and yang, then that distinction may make sense to you as well. Earthy, practical. Mercury is a god that's related to commerce and money and business and busy marketplaces. We don't always think about that because we go right for Mercury's relationship to the rational mind. We start thinking about Mercury as the reader or the writer or the thinker, or we think about Mercury as like someone who's really smart and articulate, or maybe teaching in classrooms and things like that, all of which are applicable for Mercury. But Mercury is also just the common and the everyday busyness and bustle and exchange of things in the world, especially in the earthy sign of Virgo. So this is a sign, remember, that traditionally is the sign that comes before the autumn equinox, which is the sign of Libra, obviously, is the sign that initiates that autumn equinox moment. And that's the harvesting moment of the year. So Virgo has a lot to do with preparation for harvest and preparing ourselves for a moment where our labor, our work, and our efforts will be judged and evaluated. And so there's a lot of busyness and preparation. There's a lot of bustle and hustle. And if you think, like, for example, when I was a kid, I grew up in the Methodist church. I was a preacher's kid in the Midwest in Minnesota. And I just remember certain holidays around the church and how busy everything got and how like excited, but like also sort of frenetic that things would become, like Thanksgiving or Easter or, Christmas or, the big sort of Christian holidays or whatever. But I remember as a kid, just sort of being in the church like for long hours. I was there more than most kids were because I had to be there because my family was there all day. And just that energy of just like everything's preparing for what? For the worship service maybe in the evening or in the afternoon, or some potluck that would come later, right? You guys know what a potluck is. So that kind of just like bustly energy, it's very earthy, it's very practical, it's trying to prepare, it's in anticipation of some result that's in the future or some evaluation that may be awaiting your efforts. So that kind of energy can be used in a lot of different ways, right? We are in some ways, the more unconscious that we are, the more that we are like on puppet strings with these forces. So, this time of year, it's very easy to find yourself becoming this way rather than being conscious and, participating in this energy. Now, it's a seasonal energy that's not determined by the temperature outside, or it's an archetype, right? So if you participate in the language of astrology, you don't have to be in the Northern Hemisphere to experience this either. Virgo season is not literally tied to the position of the sun in the sky, right? It's a deeper archetype than that. For example, what you're really thinking about archetypally is an interplay between light and darkness. The yang half of the year that starts in Aries, right? What is that? What's that really about? Well, archetypally, what it's about is it's about the time within the exchange of dark and light where light takes over. Before that's a physical experience, in astrology, we think of that as an archetypal experience. We think of the physical reality as actually emanating from higher forms. We think of the material universe, in fact, as emanations from higher forms. That's how our astrological ancestors received this entire paradigm. So when we think about the seasons, this is just an aside, you can participate in them as long as you understand the archetypal patterning that is behind them. And then, the patterning is universal. It's not literally attached or dependent upon the weather or even the hemisphere. In the same way, the tarot and many other forms or languages of divination work in the same way. We just think of this one more literally because it's tied to patterns in the sky, which we connect with very physical sensations on Earth, but it's still an archetypal language first and foremost. If you understand the blending of light and dark, then it works like this. At Aries, the light takes over. There is more light in the 24-hour period than there is darkness. And that's just a way that we notice in nature an archetypal quality that is the yang taking over the yin. Because the yang and the yin are in this eternal dance with one another. It's like a tango. Sometimes one person's leading and sometimes the other person's receptive. Then the receptive can lead, the yin can lead, and the yang has to fall back. So the yin and the yang are trading places in this kind of push-pull dynamic, and they each have power. They each can assert, and they each can be receptive. This is why in the yin and yang circle, for example, you'll see a little speck of black in the middle of the white and a little speck of white in the middle of the black. When the light takes over in Aries season, let's say, and from there all the way through Virgo, we're in the light half of the year where there is more light than there is darkness in the 24-hour period, where yang is dominant. However, in spring, in the first three signs, the first half of that movement, it's about the ascension of the yang, which means it's the yang of the yang. It's the masculine of the masculine, however you want to think about it. This is not literally connected to sex either. You can think of it outside of the realm of, male female anatomy. It's more universal than that too. So the yang of the yang, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, that's the ascent of yang. It's the takeover of yang. It's the building of the yang towards the maximal yang. But then when we turn the corner, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, we're now heading downhill. The light is declining, so to speak. The yang is now still dominant, but decreasing. Okay, let's give a simple analogy, right? If you have ever climbed up a really big hill, or if you've ever done some rock climbing, or if you've ever done some hiking and you've had a really steep ascent of some kind, you have to push on the way up, right? And at a certain point, when you're like going a long hike up, the energy gets to a point where it breaks through and it's no longer a struggle. You're like, I'm doing this, and it takes over, and the momentum takes over, so that you're like, it's just a matter of time until I reach the top. Your power is ascending, right? Everyone knows what that feeling is like. Even if you've gone running and you have, I'm going to run 5 miles, the first 2 you're like, oh, and then somewhere right around 2.5, it's like you hit it, and you have a breakthrough, and suddenly it feels good, and you're, like, and then the energy is like peaking, right? So then when you start to come down, right, you're still higher up than you are lower down. But now that you're coming down, the energy is starting to relax, right? It's starting to relax. That's the yin of the yang. So as we're coming down the mountainside of the light interplay between light and dark in the solar year, we hit Virgo season, and we're starting to go below the tree line again, so to speak. We're coming down the mountain, and it's like now we're about to head below the tree line. And Virgo is that moment where, we're the last like sparks of all the enthusiasm and victory and triumph from having gone to the top of the mountain are there, right? And now what happens? Well, now we're starting to think about what comes the rest of the way down, which might include, like, okay, gosh, wow, we got to make sure we're back to the car on time, because we've got to get back, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, right? The responsibilities that you're thinking about that you have to do. Or maybe on the way down, it's like, okay, now, we have to start taking stock of whatever comes next after this peak has come through. And we have lots of ways of talking about that. We start thinking about integration. Or in the seasonal year, you can think about, like, now that the light's gone, I've got to prepare, like, kids are going back to school. Like, I've got to get back into the routine, or I've got to prepare for winter. And you can imagine being in the old world, and that when that energy starts coming down, it's like, how do I prepare for surviving the winter, right? Or whatever. Like there's a totally different kind of experience as the yang is tapering off and preparing to surrender into the ascent of the yin, which is the valley below. So Virgo is like a transitional sign. And when you've got a lot of planets going through it, it's like, okay, you're in transitional space. Double-bodied signs, they were called. We call them mutable signs in modern astrology, but they correspond to cadent houses. They have a kind of interesting correspondence with cadent houses, even though in ancient astrology, there's not a one-to-one correlation between signs and houses. So we don't say Aries equals Mars equals the first house. But there is this kind of interesting way in which double-bodied signs representing transition points are very similar to cadent houses, because cadent houses also represent transition points. One of the words that was used for a cadent house by ancient astrologers is the word metacosmios, which I've talked about in a bunch of videos before. But basically, the word means in between worlds. And it's in liminal spaces, right, that we have the you could transfer that word into the realm of the signs, and say that it's in the liminal spaces of the mutable signs that we find the metacosmios in the 12 signs. And they're all ruled by Mercury or Jupiter. Pisces, Sagittarius, Jupiter, or Virgo, Gemini, which is Mercury. Those are antithetical planets. But what is the nature of their antithesis? Like, why are they opposites? One of the reasons is that Mercury is going to represent the intellectual faculty, or the discriminating faculty, and the exchange and interplay and back and forth of information, ideas, goods, money, etc. Like a basketball court where things are going up and down, back and forth, or a soccer game where they're running up and down the field all the time, or football if you're from anywhere but the United States. So that kind of back and forth, that busyness, right? That's antithetical in many ways to Jupiter's nature. Jupiter's nature is like much more sort of Brahminical, like in the Indian sense of the word. If you know what the Brahminical caste was, is the caste of people who were sort of they were sort of in their own way. They were each their own authorities. Mentally, philosophically, sort of erudite, and they were born into almost like a priestly class. So Jupiter is going to be not as interested in that fast, continuous back and forth and stream and exchange and so forth. So, for example, during Sagittarius season, we're in a transitional time as well. Same thing with Pisces season. But these are seasons that are defined more by the desire to formulate a cohesive vision, for example. That's one kind of way you can think about it. Or to pull things, disparate things together into a whole, like gathering all of your knowledge and receiving a diploma, or wearing the robes of like a PhD student with the like the Hogwarts hat, you know what I mean? So like it's like I've taken all of this stuff and I've built something grand and big out of it, and that's Jupiter's MO. Mercury's not like that. Like Mercury would much rather stay in the stream of transfer and exchange and stimulation and little loss and little decrease followed by a little increase and a little gain. And but more interested in the bustle and in interpreting things and staying in that stimulated zone. So when you're in a transitional time of space like Virgo, the other thing that's taking hold is it's a transition that has to do with a lot of things, especially because the yang is falling away and the yin is taking over. It has to do with sort of preparing for some kind of release, surrender, or change into a different space. So when you're coming, like, just think, it's very simple to think about it in terms of the school year. Think of all the things that you prepare and do and get ready to do, but what you're preparing for is to drop into some kind of zone. Like, okay, I'm going to have to go to school and I'm going to have to get into the routine. And there's a loss implied in Virgo. There's a sense of letting go of something, of the light of summer, and moving into something else. And there's a kind of bustly energy and preparing for that and trying to be ready for it, trying to mature and grow up. Because when we hit Libra, we're entering the underworld and our results are going to be judged. Remember, everything that goes up must come down in astrology. Everything, when the cup is full, it will eventually be emptied. Virgo is preparation and foresight, knowing that something's going to be emptied. How do our nerves handle that, right? Are we going to become a perfectionist, obsessive, anxious about it? Or are we going to do our due diligence and get ready for something? But when that energy is flowing through, and you've also got Mars, right, in the same sign, Venus in the same sign, Mercury in the same sign, it's like a really busy house. Everyone's hanging out in Mercury's busy, preparatory, anxious, practical, but bustling, earthy house of Virgo, preparing to give way to some greater maturing and delving into the dark part of the year. And as that's happening right now, we've had Mercury and Mars head through these combustions and then Cazimis with the sun. So especially, here's some of the things that are, you can get hung up. Here's some of the things you can get hung up on. Let's start there. First of all, there's a general way in which when we're in this liminal space, this world between worlds, and we're transitioning and we're trying to get ready for something, we anticipate something's coming and we're like, kind of trying to get ready. The potential to get obsessive and puritanical and hypercritical about ourselves, about others, about things in the environment. That's one of the things you have to watch for. I remember when I was a kid, right, and getting ready for school. It's a simple example. I'm actually thinking about my daughter getting ready for preschool, right? It's so funny. So, she wanted to like pick her outfit and all of this, and so she couldn't decide what she wanted when we took her for a special day to Target to like pick out a little outfit or whatever. And she couldn't decide, right? And she was but it was interesting watching her because it was deadly serious to her. Do you know what I mean? Like, she's so excited about this and so scared. And it's this, and just, what do I wear? How do I choose it? And then, so we picked a few options, and we thought, we'll save the tags and return the ones she doesn't want. So we'll pick a few options and then let her get home and lay them out and look at them. And because in the moment, here's what was happening. And this is Mars combust the sun in Virgo, right? My wife and I are like, this is crazy, right? Like, this is a minor decision. It's not a big deal. And we don't feel like having some kind of meltdown or epic scene here in Target. But she's a Virgo rising, right? So this is like, this energy is in her first house. It's really like hammering my little almost 4-year-old. So we were like, okay, we're going to let her come home and sort of sit with the options and think about them a little bit more, rather than like meeting our will with hers and like trying to force her to make a decision that when she was like really stressed out and like trying to make the right decision, trying to get ready for her first day of preschool. Thankfully, Target's prices aren't too bad, and we're able to afford getting a few little things to bring home. And now we've taken the rest back because she picked her outfit, right? But the point is that we all need to allow ourselves to have a few options and a few ways of thinking about things right now, a few ways of dealing with problems, a few solutions, a few strategies, and lay them out and think through them and let ourselves try them on a little bit, because the urgency of Mars is there right now. Like Mars is going to want to be really executive and just like get it done, pick it. But it may also sometimes project a level of seriousness about the matter it doesn't really exist. I found myself getting into an argument with someone, and I usually don't, I'm not like I love to debate things, and I love thinking about ideas and tossing them around with people. And I have really well defined, for the most part, ideas about astrology and so forth. And I found myself in like an argument with someone recently, after the Nodes of the Moon video that I did, which of course, because there's so many people that love evolutionary astrology out there, and my video was sort of talking about an alternative perspective, it kicked up a lot of debate, right? So, and I sort of got into an argument with someone about it. And it was nice, because after Mars was Cazimi. Thank God that Mars was Cazimi, right at the heart of the sun, because there was this clarifying effect that the argument had, at least for me personally, where afterwards, I was able to continue communicating with this person and sort of laugh about it and be like, yeah, well, lost my shit there. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that, so I think that both of us will learn something from the experience. And it was a nice moment to recognize that both of us had projected a degree of intensity and seriousness onto the discussion that really didn't need to be there. Right? It's for not because the issue doesn't matter, or because there aren't real distinctions and different sides of a debate that matter, but because there is a way to have differences of ideas and thought that are very civil. Right. And sometimes that Mars in Virgo is going to make, whether it's a debate or an argument or an idea or a strategy or an outfit that you're going to wear, right? It can just make it more serious than it really needs to be. At the same time, this past week, I'm slowly building a new website. It's been a long process. And one of the things that I'm doing as I build this website right now is I'm reviewing all of the pages that my web designer finished. And as I'm reviewing them, like I've got that editorial eye out, and it's happening right as Mercury is Cazimi, right? So there's this Mercury at the heart of the sun, just like Mars at the heart of the sun, is granted the clarity and the potential insight or learning or even healing, because you can see the truth. Sometimes the sun just has that effect where you get a Cazimi and it's just like, oh, wow, there's clarity. Thank you. That's really amazing. So when things are right at the heart of the sun, they're really amazing. When they're like peeling off the sun, or when they're approaching the sun and they're within that 3-4 degrees, something like that, sometimes it's sort of, it's sort of like dealing with that, whatever that planetary character is, and then just give them like a really bad sunburn. Right. And then like give them a really bad sunburn and make them spend a whole day at a beach just filled with crappy people. And then imagine trying to have a conversation with them, like Mars Cazimi, like Mars combusts the sun, is like Mars, like he's just like pissed off, he's got a really bad sunburn, and he's had to sit with like the world's worst in-laws or something like all day long at the beach. And then he's like, so he's normally already kind of an edgy character, right, Mars, but then just kind of inflame, just think of the inflamed version of Mars. So same thing goes for Mercury or any planet when it's close to the sun or walking away from the sun, so to speak. So Venus is like that, which means our sense of style, taste, issues in relationships, love, issues with women or girls, feminine things in general, all can be feeling a little like parched right now with the proximity to the sun. mercurial things are Cazimi at the moment, but they've been going through a bit of like, if you've had Mercury stuff, if you have technology that's been on the fritz, or if you've just been feeling really more mentally aggro, that's potentially there with Mercury and Mars. And then again, Mars itself, the god of war, has been like this. And then you're just putting it in that really bustly sign of Virgo, really practical, concerned, thoughtful, careful, but also, is prone to worry. Rightly so. Virgo, we're entering the dark side of the year. We should be preparing. We should be preparing for the harvest moment. Virgo is that part of us that's like, the things I do, they matter. The things I say matter. The things I think matter. Well, sometimes that's exhausting, right? Sometimes we just like, they don't matter. It's fine. But there is a sort of ongoing sense in which we have to be aware of and in an awareness of the kinds of stuff that's bustling around in our head, the kinds of actions we're doing. And we have to try to mind and tend to those things because the little things end up playing out in the results. You know what I mean? Like, a simple example. If you guys remember, when I was a kid, there was a show that was popular. I don't know, maybe in like junior high or something. And it was called, it was called Home Improvement with Tim the Toolman Taylor. I forget what his name was, the guy who played him. But at any rate, he was always like trying to fix things or do different like projects, and basically just choosing the really lazy route where he's just like, just screw it in or use the drill or just pound it with a hammer. It was just something that would be so sort of stupid, right? Right? And sort of heavy-handed and not careful and not thoughtful. And then the whole thing would fall apart. And he was supposed to be like an expert. And his buddy, who was much more the Virgo, I don't remember what his name was, but he had like a sidekick in the show who was on the show with him, and he had a beard, and he was a more soft-spoken guy for the most part, and was always like more thoughtful and attentive to the details, recognizing that these small things actually matter when it comes to the result. So right now, you can just imagine that like we're trying to be thoughtful and careful because we know the result matters. We're in a transitional space where we're trying to mind things and pay attention to things where the result matters. But also, it's hard when there's 4 planets and there's a lot of combustion going on. It's like, okay, the results matter, but like, the pressure that we place on ourselves can be enormous, or the result that we're imagining, right? The weight of judgment that we anticipate somewhere in the future might be completely unrealistic. Right? Like, I remember thinking, that the way, you guys probably remember this too, the way that I look for school in the morning at 16 has like an eternal bearing on my life. Do you know what I mean? Or something completely stupid like that. So we have to be careful of that right now, basically, of assuming that either that the results, the extreme would be like the results, I'm not being careful, I'm not being thoughtful, and I really need to be because the results matter. And it might be some tension and pressure on that. On the other hand, we might be placing way too much pressure on ourselves, thinking that the results matter way more than they actually do. One simple teaching for Virgo season, with all these planets sort of swallowed up by the sun, but with the Cazimis too, that can really empower us, is to realize that what really matters is the intention. It's where your heart's at, and it's just giving it your best without harming yourself or harming others in the process. Whether you're trying to communicate an idea that you're passionate about, you're trying to organize or strategize something at work, you're trying to communicate a better way of doing something to somebody, or you're dealing with someone delivering a criticism to you, or whatever. We have to be so gentle with ourselves and remember that really, are we checking in with our heart? Where's our heart in all of this? And if we're with ourselves in our hearts, then things will be, the best result will come as long as we're just trying our best and staying in our hearts. So that's maybe the simplest message for today. Now, meanwhile, Moon is in Scorpio for the next day and a half. So we got another little time to go with the Moon in Scorpio in its in the sign of its fall, in the sign of its depression. So it's a little challenging place for the Moon. You can learn a lot from it always, but it also means that lunar things might be a little bit more troubling right now. So lunar things can have to do with the home, with the family, with health, with women or mothers, with things related to property, family karma. It can also be a more volatile place because you're in Mars's sign. The moon is in Mars's sign, and the moon likes to create a weave, like a web, or the moon likes to create a nest. The moon likes to create a smooth ecology. And, Mars is invasive. Mars cuts and severs. Mars penetrates and divides. So just, know what you're dealing with. This is a waxing sextile. This is we're in a waxing crescent phase right now with the moon heading into first quarter. There's something that's like taking your emotional energy and trying to get things done with a degree of stick-to-itiveness and preparation and carefulness, but being careful not to tip over into volatile emotional territory or, burnt up mental energy where you exhaust yourself, you exhaust others, you're critical of yourself or others, or there's blow ups and, some kind of puritanical attitude or something like that. Be careful of that because you can build something nice right now. And then we push into the first quarter moon in the next couple of days. And as we push into the first quarter moon, this is a moment of actualizing a vision because the first quarter moon is happening in conjunction with Jupiter in Sagittarius with a square to Neptune. So you've got kind of a T-square energy going on, and that happens into Thursday into Friday, Thursday evening, Friday morning. And so that first quarter moon energy is kind of a moment of taking the Virgoan preparation and sort of starting to synthesize or blend it with a larger vision. So if you feel like you're kind of just in the trenches with stuff right now, dealing with stuff, you'll start to feel like you're seeing, what do they say, seeing the forest for the trees, or seeing the forest from the trees, or however that saying goes. You'll see the larger picture in the next couple of days. So even if it feels like you're grinding something out right now, don't worry, because that larger sense of why you're doing this, or the bigger purpose, or questions about the bigger purpose that you need to consider, those will come in and probably give a nice Jupiterian boost in the next couple of days. So that's what I've got for you guys today for the forecast. Now, as promised, I want to open up to Q&A. So I'm very happy to take whatever questions you might have for me about anything. Astrology, the planets, the houses, the signs, astrophilosophy, whatever you want to ask questions about. I've been meeting with someone who's been helping me kind of up my game on YouTube a little bit, just like learning how to optimize your experience, asking you guys questions, making sure that I engage you more in my posts. It's like lots of things that I'm learning about this because it's pretty new to me. So tonight I want to just kind of start off by just being like, okay, what are your questions? So I'm going to scroll through and see what I've got here. Monica says, hi, Adam, glad to catch you. Questions, debilitated Jupiter effects. Well, anytime you have a debilitated Jupiter when it's in Virgo or Gemini, you're just placing it in that dichotomy that I talked about earlier, where Mercury and Jupiter have this kind of antithesis relationship, right? So for example, when you put Jupiter in Virgo, sometimes you'll get like an archetypal figure that might crop up as like the what was her name on Saturday Night Live? I think she was played by Dana Carvey. She was like the church lady, and she was just like really persnickety, right? And so sometimes Jupiter, that wants to be like Santa Claus, or like the sort of emblem of like faith and royalty and grandness, is just like, it's like it can't sit still. You know what I mean? It's just kind of bustling with in Virgo, for example, with the sort of earthy, potentially critically and sort of hyper rational energy. And that can come across as like, the sort of puritanical churchwoman from SNL. That's one example. Jupiter and Gemini is a little bit different, but it's not, when we say debilitated, it's not like you would say to someone in a client reading like, oh my God, your planet's so debilitated. you know what I mean? The language of ancient astrology is for us as students and practitioners, not for clients, because we're not out to try to make a client worried or afraid. What we really want to do is help a client understand what that archetypal tension is about. So ancient astrologers had designations like this to try to denote tense planetary dynamics that are going on that can result in things that we all recognize as sort of difficult to deal with. For example, another great Jupiter, I actually spoke with someone who had Jupiter in Virgo today, and my daughter does too. And like sometimes it's like someone who has some official role to play, right? But they may also end up continually getting stuck with administrative work that's tedious, or that they have to do things that are like kind of contrary to the real post they're supposed to hold. For example, like my wife and I are teachers, and the hardest part about running a yoga studio for 10 years has been the management, the behind the scenes stuff like accounting and paychecks and taxes, and you know what I mean? So that Jupiter in Virgo is also like, I'm better like teaching a yoga class. Like, so we had to hire a manager eventually because we were like, yeah, this part isn't our strength. That actually happened while Jupiter was in Gemini some years ago. So at any rate, that's just, simple example. Thanks for the question. All right, let's see. What else do I got? Saturn in the 5th house effects. Well, it depends on what sign, and it depends on a lot of other things in the chart, right? But Saturn in the 5th house sometimes can result in stifled creativity, for example. 5th house is the joy of Venus, in a house that's traditionally associated with creativity and anything that's joyous and fun and recreational, or that has an element of performance. It's related to children and pregnancy and sex. It's also it's just a place that's very prolific and fertile and sort of joyful, and relates to anything that we do for leisure or fun. Sometimes with excess too. Sometimes it's a place of hedonism. So Saturn in the 5th, for example, sometimes a person might have a hard time having fun. It just might be a karma where it's like, I have a hard time loosening up. Sometimes it means that they have a hard time getting pregnant, or sometimes it means that, they may have very few children, or just struggle to get pregnant. Not necessarily, though. It really depends on a lot of other factors. And I never want to say, like, if you get too narrow about it, if you get too narrow about it, then, you can really freak people out. If you get too generous about it, then, you just blow smoke up people's butt. So Saturn in the 5th, I've seen it is one of the placements, traditionally speaking, that where people might have a more conflicted relationship with children on some level, right? Like you have a child who you love your children, but you have a karma with children in some way. And that's just Saturn's, as the Lord of karma. And it doesn't always come on right away either. Sometimes it takes time. It's like, yeah, my kid went through a really intense drug problem in high school or something like that. Or other times it can be that you're into a form of art that's classical and really refined and formal or traditional in some way. So there's a whole range of things that Saturn in the 5th can indicate. Too many to list. One of the other things that you think about with Saturn in the 5th house is that sometimes people get repressed, or they're suppressed by someone else in relation to pleasure or even sexuality. And then sometimes overcompensations occur. Like, Saturn is related, for example, to like what do they call it? Like a sort of lecherous old man. Like it's normal if like a young man or woman is really attracted to the opposite sex. We're like, oh yeah, well they like to date, or they're kind of like, they're more of a sensual person or whatever. But when you put that into like, an 80, 90-year-old person's body, sometimes the stereotype in the world is like, yeah, that person's perverted. It's unfortunate, I know, but you get what I'm saying. So similarly, like Saturn represents the potential to get like sort of repressed and pent up. Like there's hilarious commercials. I remember growing up, like there'd always be a commercial of like a 90-year-old woman like slamming a Pepsi with like a big sparkly wig on or something like that. And basically the idea with Saturn in the 5th is like, don't get too like pent up, because then it can come out in ways that are really weird and sometimes really unhealthy and sort of extreme. And Saturn is, people don't know this, but like I heard Rick Levine one time on a bus in India. I was with him. If you guys know who Rick Levine is, I was on a bus with him in India one time while we were speaking at this conference. And someone was asking like, okay, so what sign do you think is the horniest? We were all just joking around, right? And he was like, oh, Capricorn for sure. And everyone laughed. And I was like, no, he's totally right. And I knew exactly what he was going to say. He was like, yeah, because, Saturn gets so pent up, and then when it acts out, it's just kind of crazy. So you also have to be careful of like Saturn in the 5th as sort of like the wild child with anything that has to do with indulgence or pleasure. So hopefully that helps a little bit to get you thinking about it. But yeah, it's hard to answer it, thoroughly. All right, let's keep going. Where do you view court cases from? House. Oh, that's interesting. It depends. Like if you're doing a horary question, your seventh house might be the person you're in like your opponent in a lawsuit. The 10th might be the judge. The fourth might be the verdict. The rulers of those places being really important. So mostly in horary, that's how it would be set up. But there are exceptions. You can look at lawyers as the second house and the eighth house, the counsel of the querent and the opponent. There's different ways of doing it, but I would really recommend checking out John Frawley's horary textbook, the revised edition, if you're getting into horaries with court cases in general. But otherwise, the ninth house is the house of law, whether it's cosmic law, karmic law, the laws of physics, or the laws of a society. That's all ninth house. That's why astrology formally belongs to the ninth house as well. So the legal system itself could be ninth house, whereas the judge tends to be 10th. The judge in the 10th, because you're at the pinnacle of the sky where there is a pivot between what's rising and what's falling. And the judge is at the position determining if one is vindicated, rising, or if they're condemned, falling. And so the judge belongs to the 10th. All right. Cool. People coming in from New Zealand. That's amazing. That's really cool. I'd love to visit there somehow. You're in Minnesota. There's a Minnesotan here. That's awesome. Love. I was just in Minnesota. I'm not in New Zealand. No, I'm in Washington, D.C. Yeah. How would my North Node in Aquarius benefit me in my life? Well, here we are back at the nodes. So look, the view of the nodes from an evolutionary view is not the view that I take. So, if you're into EA, you can either put earmuffs on or just forgive me. So the basic view of Rahu in Indian astrology, which is the one that I adhere to most closely, is, Rahu is a planet that perpetuates incarnations through lust, right? Just through desire. Now, all of us have desire because we're all incarnated. That's the basic idea behind the karmic philosophy. So it's not a bad thing to have a North Node because we all have one, right? So it's not about condemning Rahu or the North Node, but it's about being very clear that really what the North Node in your chart is meant to do from a traditional perspective is teach you about the nature of your ego and the stuff that it's just sort of endlessly hungry for. And that's different for everybody, and it mostly look at the house that it's in, because that house, the topics of that house will give you more tangible things to think about than a sign. In modern astrology, we spend way too much energy on signs, when traditional astrologers thought of signs as places to understand relationships between planets, which were more primary. So the simple answer is, you want to look at the position of Saturn in your chart as the ruler of that node, but you also want to look at the house position and just think, okay, I'm hungry for experience in this house. And what I'm trying to do is learn how to curb that desire, meaning learn how to it's impossible to get rid of our desires, right? Because we're incarnated beings who have them. But learning to curb them means, for example, let's say you have a North Node in the 7th house position of relationships. The basic idea is that you're going to be hungry for relationships, and in a kind of insatiable way. And you're going to think that there's something about relationships that I just need to be fulfilled. And really that's a lie, right? That's an illusion, because it's not going to lead you anywhere. The idea in the ancient karmic philosophy is that, there's nothing new under the sun here. This is like an amazing sort of endless universe, but it's like a matrix, and there's all sorts of storylines, and they all have this cyclical dynamic in common, where once you get what you have, then you have to sustain it. It either wears you down or it wears down, and then you lose it, or it dissipates, and then there's pain and suffering and letting it go, and then you replace it with a new desire. And these plot lines can be really magnificent, filled with all sorts of ups and downs. But the idea is that for many people in the world, many more people than are enjoying this cycle, there are people who are suffering from it. And so sometimes if we have a nice life circumstance, we can feel very privileged and think, well, this is all great. How great this place is. But it's different when we're in hell. Do you know what I mean? Like when we're really suffering with something, then we start to question the nature of our desires a little bit more. So the idea, again, with the nodes, it's really just it's like a river of karma that's running through your chart. Neither node is more or less a problem than the other, and neither node is more or less an answer than the other. They're simply trying to teach you about a karmic cycle of extremes that you go to. And the south node is actually often a bit more conducive to helping us off the wheel, because the south node tends to be the one who says, get me out of here. I have to get out of here. And sometimes to an unhealthy extreme. Like the north node is like binge eating, and the south node is like super restrictive dieting, right? And they bounce back and forth between one another all the time. And really what we're trying to do is just slowly step outside of that cycle, right? And just slowly start to identify our happiness doing different kinds of things, rather than thinking, well, whatever I do with my north node will eventually bring me happiness, or whatever I, fix with my south node, or whatever problems I fix in the past, or whatever things I do in the future. They're both sort of delusions from this standpoint. Delusions that we can't help but participate in, and so there's a dharma, there's some sense of karmic duty attached to them. But once we start schematizing them in terms of the past being filled with problems that we didn't get right, and the north node as a compensating lesson that we need to learn in this lifetime, we're way outside the bounds of what the nodes are actually about. So that to me is where I have a real issue with the evolutionary paradigm. People can feel free to disagree with me all they want, but the basic idea, that the way that I use them is not so much to say, what can I learn or get from my north node, as much as it is to say, what is the warning, what is the lesson that my north node is trying to tell me about? Just imagine the north node. Another way you can think about it that's really nice that I heard Vic Takara talk about the other day was the north node is like a punk. And like punk music, like, I'm just like, I just want stuff, and I'm pissed, and I'm angry, and I'm like, and just really like, aggro in that way. Whereas the south node is much more emo, right? It's much more like, I just want out of this. There's so much pain. I just like, and like, right. So we can go to either extreme where we're like, just give me what I want. I want this. I'm going to become this. And then the south node can go to the opposite extreme. Like, I'm so broken. I'm so much in pain. Help me. I want to get out of all of the suffering. But both are the extremes both extremes are enabled by one another constantly. So we want to be aware of the cycle. And then by taking up spiritual activities in our life that start to preoccupy more of our time and our mental energy, we can gradually start to shift out of those things. The cycling nodes of the moon are constantly telling us about where those rivers are streaming through our lives. Nodal returns become a really good time to really take a look at those stories. And people get the wrong assumption. They think that if I'm doing spiritual life well enough, then I'll start doing everything that like my north node wants me to do, or I'll start getting rid of all the problems that my south node says that I have. And actually, it's not like that at all. It's actually more like when you start taking up spiritual life and it occupies more of your time, more of your consciousness, more of your interest, being with people who are focused on spiritual practices and cultivating spiritual habits. When that starts occupying more of your time, what you'll notice is that gradually the hold that these patterns implied by the nodes have on you in both directions start to reduce. That's when real freedom actually starts to be gained too. Real freedom isn't found by doing your north node well. That's a problematic idea. So, of course, all of these are my opinions, and you feel free to dismiss them or disagree with them or whatever. So, but that's how I would talk about the North Node being of benefit to you. Learn from what the desire is that's there, and you'll benefit from knowing more about that. Okay, let's see. Okay, Toronto too. Wow, that's really cool. Let's see. Auckland. Wow, that's amazing. Remember to like the video. Yes, if you like this, give it the thumbs up, and also share it with others or subscribe or whatever. That helps. I guess there's an algorithm that helps other people find the channel. Let's see. All right. First day of preschool is okay. I'm going down to find more questions. I have Venus, Pluto, and Saturn within a few degrees of the sun in my chart. Would they all be combust? Yes. Pluto can't be combust really because Pluto's not a visible planet, right? So it's not like I think Pluto can get a pass. But if Venus and Saturn are within, say, 7 or 8 degrees of the sun in your chart, then I would, yeah, they'll have that quality of being just like a little bit burnt up by the sun. And that can mean a lot of different things depending on house placement, depending on aspects. So don't flip out about it. Just know that those planets sometimes might get a little exhausted. Their energy might be a little sucked sometimes or tapped by the sun. And figuring out what that means takes a while. So don't jump to conclusions and don't get too, don't freak yourself out about it. All right. Okay. Virgo North Node in the 3rd house. Oh, that's a simple one, right? Like you can just think about it like this. Like if you have a Virgo North Node in the 3rd house, you can just think about, maybe the tendency to be overly like trying to control details in your everyday environment, or trying to stay organized, or trying to get organized, or trying to be independent in your thinking, or trying to have a strong mind, or prove something to yourself about your intelligence, or something like that. You just think about the desires in that area of your life in a mercurial way, kind of propelling you. And so sometimes people will just be like, really think about their self-esteem in terms of their mind with that placement, and may just tend to overcompensate in different ways with that placement. Or the opposite tendency of the South Node in Pisces in the 9th house might be to escape into grandiose spiritual stuff, and then flip over and really try to get organized or something like that. These are very simplistic explanations, but yeah. So you just think about the cycle between those two houses, especially in relation to the mind, and questions about surrender and faith and greater visions and plans, and then the more hypercritical mind and the details of the mind. And there's a polarity there, a push and a pull, between extreme desire and extreme renunciation in two different directions you have to be careful of. That's an example there. All right, let's see. Any other questions you guys have? I'm looking through. What do you think about Venus conjunct Uranus in Leo? It's almost exact. In your chart, you must be talking about, because right now Venus is not in Leo. So yeah, you must be talking about that in your chart. Okay, so yeah, I mean, Venus and Uranus together can be like the horrible plastic surgery. Do you know what I mean? Like, let's do something that's really advanced and avant-garde and different. Let's take a risk. Let's try to use technology to enhance beauty, and it ends up just making you look kind of like a monster. Like any Venus-Uranus dynamic can be like that, where Venus-Uranus can be like, let's look as sexy as we can and as outside of the box as we can, or let's try to like sort of invent or mutate the Venus somehow, and it kind of end up looking kind of weird. On the other hand, it's like, great for, you have things like feminism with Venus Uranus, and you have things like empowerment of women, or women who are inventors, or you have like, anything regarding, sexual diversity, or anything that might be about something that's progressive, rebellious, avant-garde in relation to art. So it has a lot of different expressions, right? And it looks, so you have to look at house position and a lot of other things. And then, of course, in Leo, you have to look at the position of the sun in the chart and see what the relationship is, because that's the host of those planets. So, yeah. Okay. Let's see. Pros and cons of Taurus moon in the 4th. Oh yeah, that's a fun one. So, like if you have the Taurus moon in the 4th, first of all, it's an exalted moon, which sometimes can indicate some kind of luxurious or beautiful, or even just really simple and sweet, like domestic environment. Of course, there's a lot of potential mitigating factors that could, that might interfere with that. But it suggests, remember, the 4th house in your chart's the base of the chart. So you're looking at the place that acts as, Manilius called it the eternal base of the chart. It's the only place that's talked about as the alpha and omega of the chart, the beginning and end of all things. This is because planets hit the nadir in this place in the chart. They hit the lowest point, and this is the darkest point, and it's also the point at which the sun, having gone all the way around, rests and then starts to rise again. So it's the end, and then it's the beginning. All planets rest here before starting to rise again. They go all the way around the wheel, and then they come back down to the base, and then they start rising again. So it is your foundation. It has to do with those things that prop you up, upon which you can stand in life. And that's why it's related to parents and family, and you're growing up in the environment that you grow up in, your sort of the village or city that you grow up in, and what you have that's given to you by your ancestors or parents. Also, in some deeper, more enigmatic ways, the fourth house is related to the mysteries. It was before the eighth house ever got to be called the place of occult studies. It was the fourth house, because this is the darkest place. It was called the place of the mysteries. And so there's sometimes the moon in Taurus in that house will have a kind of sensual, pagan, earthy vibe that's deeper. It's darker. It's a little bit more mysterious. It's not quite your apple pie Taurus moon. It has a deeper understanding of the reality of Hades or of depth. And that can make for a really, like I'm thinking of like a magical, but maybe not, like a fairy tale, right? It's magical, not entirely safe. Kids still love that stuff, even though it's not totally safe. Do you know what I mean? Because it's real, but it's not real. And like my daughter loves fairy tales, and some of them are pretty dark. But that Taurus moon in the fourth has this kind of richer substratum behind it, is what I'm trying to say. And that can play out in complicated ways. Like you're raised in a family that's supportive, but there's deeper secrets. You know what I mean? Sometimes it can also play out in ways where, there's just the desire, like the working from home or the base of operations or mothering or domestic things, or just the lunar archetype can be just really, really strong in the person's life because it's angular. And especially if it's a nighttime chart. And the exalted moon will also typically provide lunar things in life that are nice. Like there's a kind of inherited lunar fortune in life when the moon's exalted in Taurus. Depends on other things always, but yeah. Okay, let's see. Insights into a Capricorn midheaven. The Capricorn midheaven is like, it depends. First of all, if you're doing whole sign houses, the midheaven can float between the 11th, 10th, or 9th. And in which case, if you're talking about the Capricorn 10th or talking about the Capricorn midheaven in a different house, it's a little different. But let's just talk about like the Capricorn 10th house. Let's just assume the midheaven's in the 10th house and it's Capricorn too. It's really meaningless to talk about what that means unless you know where Saturn is, right? Because it's just the sign. You can think of signs in traditional astrology like they're like lightning rods. The planets are everything. They really are. The planets are the most important things. And you don't need a million of them either. You can just work with the basic 7. And a lot of people need to build their vocabulary and greater like organizational capacities in their mind and better efficiency as an interpreter by simply learning to use fewer things, at least at first. So in my first year program, when I teach traditional astrology to people, we work with only the 7 planets for the first year of my 2-year program. And the reason for that is that, again, it helps you to become a better reader, clearer and more simple. So in this case, Capricorn 10th house, there's something you could say that's Saturnian about your career. You can use some of the other secondary qualities like the element of earth or the tropical nature or cardinal nature of the sign. But you really need to know, where is Saturn? If the house is empty and nothing else is in that house especially, then you have to look at where Saturn is. Because the lightning rod effect of the sign is to say the topics of the 10th place are hosted by Saturn. That's really what it means when Capricorn is in your 10th house. It's not, oh, I have a Capricornian career. No, you have a Saturnine career. Capricorn is just designating Saturn as the host of those topics. This is something we don't understand in modern astrology because we place way too much emphasis on the signs. So in traditional astrology, it's not reading your 10th house in terms of Capricorn. It's reading your 10th house in terms of planets in that house or in terms of the ruler or host of that house. So, this is why traditionally the signs were actually called houses. And the houses, what we think of as houses, were actually called places. Like the 12, like if you had 12 tarot cards, 12 positions, and you have 12 signs in those positions, right? And they're whole signs. So one sign goes to one position. So in a tarot spread, you might have the position of physical health, of one's mother, of one's siblings. But depending on what time of day it is, so to speak, the different 12 tarot cards in this deck, the 12 signs, can fill any of the 12 places, and they each get one. And what they're really doing, though, is telling us, okay, so the 10th position, career, that's filled by Capricorn. Capricorn traditionally was talked about as the house of Saturn. That's where that word house actually comes from. The signs are the houses of the planets. This is why, again, in traditional astrology, you look at the 10th and you go, okay, I want to know something about career, which is the 10th position, and there's no planets in Capricorn, then I want to look to Saturn. And even if there were planets in Capricorn, then you're analyzing those planets, and then you're analyzing their relationship to Saturn, who's in a different position, dealing with different topics, and you're synthesizing those things. That's what you're actually doing. So long answer short, look at Saturn in your chart, because Saturn's position in the chart, Saturn's context in the chart will tell you about 10th house matters way more than Capricorn will. Okay, that's my response there. Let's see. Could you speak, hi, Mars and Taurus in the 5th, is this associated with laziness or poor productivity? No, that's a stereotype. You gotta ignore that kind of stuff. The real question is, where is Venus? If Venus has a good relationship with that Mars and Taurus, it'd be a very productive Mars and Taurus. You might just be dealing with a bit of Mars-Venus tension, and the Mars-Venus tension is what you really want to know more about. But Mars-Venus tension looks different for different people. Sometimes it's laziness, sometimes it's something totally different. So we have to be very careful of cliches, because every person is different, right? And so the language of astrology, the dignities, the houses, the signs, the aspects, they're all there to teach us how to reach a higher degree of specificity and understanding about a person's behavior. So anytime that something sounds like, well, is this sign in this house mean this? Like 99% of the time, the answer is going to be no. Because there might be something to any one given interpretation, the pantheon of the planets and their positions and at any given time and in any given chart are incredibly idiosyncratic. Astrology is all about learning a set of rules and stereotypes, only to eventually transition into reading a language that is subtle and fluid. It's artful to actually read an astrology chart. So you have to be really careful of cliches, especially applying them to yourself when you're reading your chart. Guys, there's nothing more painful than that, right? If the chart doesn't help you see something new about yourself or find a new way of holding your struggles, being real about them while also seeing them from different nuanced angles in a continuous way, then you're not really doing astrology, because the point of astrology is to speak to something, namely the sky, where there are divine powers that have this ability to grasp and seize upon what's going on in our life from many different angles that are instructive. We're trying to connect with that voice. So I always say this to people, not to use your question as a soapbox. I'm sorry. But it's a good question. But anytime you fall into that, like, I've heard that Venus in Aries means I'm just going to be shitty in love or something like that. You know what I mean? We always have to, try to understand where the stereotype is coming from, because that's helpful. But then, learn to see things within greater webs of context within the chart. All right. Anyway, there was another question up here. Could you speak a little about annual perfections and what things you might keep an eye on or look for in practice when looking at a Time Lord for the year, in this case, Mercury? Look at Mercury retrogrades. Like whenever I have an annual perfection year that's ruled by Mercury, it's like, look at the retrogrades and look at those combustion times for Mercury, and then look at the Cazimi moments. And then I would look at the transitions between morning star and evening star. Like, when is Mercury making its first appearance as evening star? Or when is it making its first appearance as morning star? Because those appearances will also often result in things becoming clear, or some transitional state that's really potentially positive. and the combustion phases might be a little bit more difficult, but it's sort of like as Mercury goes for the year, so go you when it's a Mercury year. So just pay attention to the cycles of Mercury for sure. That's about all I could say to that. Aspects that Mercury makes, hard aspects to malefics, can be challenging. Watch for the aspects to benefics during the year. They'll generally be good. And keep in mind the context of Mercury in the natal chart and in the perfection chart as well, in terms of the topical connections to houses. Okay, let's see. Okay. Saturn retrograde natally. Well, retrogrades generally, think about it like this, right? When a planet is in its own secondary motion, it's following its own course. It's moving according to its own desire. And all of the secondary motions of the planets run against the grain of the primary motion of the sky, the diurnal motion of the sky that carries everything from rising to culminating to setting, round and round. No motion is faster than that. No planet can overtake that motion. That happens in a 24-hour day. That's the rotation of the Earth on its axis that's creating the appearance of that vision. Planets that are normally going through the zodiac are moving slowly against the grain of that direction. They're moving from west toward the east, whereas the diurnal motion is carrying everything from east to west. So the general meaning of that, the planets moving against the grain of the primary motion, is that they are representative of the tendency that beings in this realm have to pursue their own separative desires. This is the karmic philosophy that Plato had, that yogis had, that the old Vedic astrologers had. So the planets moving in their secondary motion on a certain level symbolically represent all of our desires to be independent and separate from the divine. Like, I'm my own thing. I'm not part of the big thing. I'm doing my own thing, which we all have. We all do that. So it's that secondary motion against the grain that represents the world of Shakespearean dramas that are all playing out. All the planets are representing those elaborate dramas playing out in the world by means of moving against the grain of that greater unifying motion. That's how Plato explains this world in contrast to the eternal. So, and that's the yogis' same thing. So when a planet goes retrograde, they now appear to be moving along with the greater primary motion. And so one way that you can think about this, which I've found really helpful, is to think about the planet's intentions, wills, and separative desires as being lost, or as having to give up something that we've gained through a separative impulse or desire, that's the story of our life. So when you translate that into, like astro speak, it's a retrograde planet indicates something that will have to be given back, something that you might get or that you might gain that you'll lose later, or a turnabout where some greater force takes over the karma, a turn of circumstance that's really out of your control, because this is about a planet losing control in this sense. Having to give back control means there's some really radical turn of karma around that planet in your lifetime. It's as though something that the planet represents at some point just does a big pivot in your life. And that could be for the better too, right? Like, there's no reason this has to be like totally tragic. A retrograde Saturn can, if it's really badly debilitated, can mean that a badly debilitated condition turns around and gets better. And it doesn't mean that you'll forever lose something or that you'll go from rags to riches. Like, most of the time, our lives are somewhere in the middle between like extreme tragedy and like extreme great fortune. So yeah, you might gain something and lose it, and sometimes a few times in life. Like, if you have the ruler of your seventh house retrograde, sometimes that just means you're going to have a few really meaningful relationships in your life, and they're each going to turn in an unexpected way or in an unexpected manner. And that doesn't mean that you won't end up being with one of them for, a really long time or even the rest of your life. It's just there may be reversals. There's karmic reversals in life that we all face, right? Like, I thought I was going to be a lawyer when I was younger, right? Because I was, of a ninth house moon. So I was like, maybe law, and then I was like, maybe I'll go to seminary and be a minister. No. And then somehow I guess I landed on astrologer. But the point is that, like, there's all like twists that happen, right? So the simple point is that if you have a planet that's retrograde and it's ruling a topic, you can expect there might be a radical turning point around that topic. It's a simple way of thinking about it. Sometimes you can also think about, I've talked about it like this, like Pac-Man is gobbling up degree pellets. Like a planet's moving through the zodiac, and it's like 1 Aries, 2 Aries, 3 Aries, 4 Aries, 5 Aries, 6 Aries, and then all of a sudden it's retrograde. And it's like, blip, got to like literally barf out the zodiac pellets that it ate, right? So you can think it's literally numerical gain when a planet turns retrograde is being given back. So there's a turn or a reversal that happens, and oftentimes that's literally something that I've sort of taken in. It will come out. So different ways of thinking about it. There's a lot more that could be said about that as well. We're almost to an hour and 10 minutes, so I'll take like 1 or 2 more questions, and then I'll close it down for the night. Let's see. Have you found there to be better time based on astrology to work with plant medicines? No. I would say no, because I drank ayahuasca for like 10 years, right? On and off, but for sometimes very, regularly. Where we worked with the Santo Daime for a long time, which is from Brazil, and they drink pretty regularly. And when I drank ayahuasca, like I went through eclipses, I went through retrogrades. I went through a lot of different ceremonies. I mean, I don't know, so well over 100. So there was a lot of different ceremonies and a lot of different astrology. And I learned something when you're thinking about astrology, if you're into plant medicine and that's a path that you're on, in a responsible setting, by the way, then, I think if you have an eye for astrology, you'll find that the plant medicine has a way of helping you work with, learn, and harmonize with whatever energies are there. The astrology is our friend, really. And so I find that like thinking too much about when to do stuff with astrology generally gets in the way. If you meditate on something in your heart and then you go forward with trying to clarify and have a good intention, it's not going to harm anyone. That's trying not to be selfish. That's humble. It's, whatever that's offered up. And then you go with what feels right. Part of astrology is trying to get us off the training wheels of astrology too. It's a big part of astrology, actually, because we all have the inherent sense of divine timing like built into us. Astrology is in some ways training wheels in that respect. And when we make mistakes and then we look back on the astrology, we learn a lot more from that than trying to preordain the success of something, which typically demonstrates a level of control that's problematic in my experience. Okay. Yeah, you gave me on a soapbox. That's the problem. If I do live questions and answers, then it's just like, oh, great. Just let me rant about stuff. So, okay, let's see. Let's see if I can take one more. Now that they're discovering new planets, do you think there is an undiscovered planet that's influencing your natal charts that we haven't discovered yet? Oh my God. And that's like the perfect opportunity for me to rant. Okay. So I'm just kidding. So let me try to answer that question really succinctly. No, I don't, because planets are like planets are omens, right? So you can work with astrology while using certain sets of omens, almost like different types of tarot spreads, right? Like I work almost exclusively in my natal practice with only the 7 traditional planets. I throw in Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in transit work mostly. And I'll pay, if people want me to pay attention to them in natal reading because they want me to, then I will. But you can work with just the traditional 7. You can add in the outers and work with that set. The biggest, in my opinion, the biggest misconception in astrology is that more planets equals a more objective or more true astrology. That's not true, because astrology is a science of omens. These are omens in the sky. More omens doesn't mean a better reading. Just like more tarot cards in a spread doesn't give a better reading. You can use 3 cards and have a really nice spread, speaking really eloquently. We have to learn to think about astrology this way. Otherwise, we're going to be seduced into trying to objectify astrology and to objectify the sky. Right? Like you could literally use only asteroids and no traditional planets and no outer planets, just a set of 6 asteroids that you like. Do you know what I mean? So it's not bound by that. And there's no more objective place that we're going to get to. Because what are we going to eventually do, right? Eventually it's like, well, if you really want to get objective, let's start talking about, you start including like, well, what about the other galaxies? And what about, it's like, well, if we can't, our mind cannot circumscribe how vast the heavens are. So astrology is not trying to get at exhaustive truth. Astrology is like a sage sitting in the sky that's infinitely wiser than we are. And we're just approaching it being like, hey, teach us something, show us something, help us grow, help us learn. What should I do? What's going on? And the sage gives lessons to us according to how much we can comprehend. If we go to that sage and we demand that it speak to us in a language that carries way more sophistication and way more stuff and way more signs and whatever, we may not be respecting the oracle, because we may not be asking in a spirit of humility, just saying, just give me something I can manage here, right? Instead, we're trying to solve everything or something like that. And it's like, oh, then you're not even acknowledging it's actually a person you're talking to, right? If you think your dog's a person, most people do, right? Most people are like, yeah, my dog's a person. What does a person mean? It just means a spirit soul. So similarly, like the ancient astrologers conceptualized the planets as omens of the gods, and the gods in turns, the demigods, as servants of the divine mind, right? So when we approach this, like we're literally reaching out to talk to something. Just because the thing up there, it has unlimited agents that can speak to us, doesn't mean we need to get like oh my God, like, is Susan gonna date me? Okay, shit, I need like 4,000 of you agents in the sky to come and like give me your take on it. When they're all infinitely wiser than us, I'm sure one of them could do the trick. You know what I mean? So that's my take. Take it or leave it. If that resonates with you, cool. If not, no big deal. So, all right. But could they discover more objects that have great importance and are really interesting and special? Of course, and I hope they do. That's my answer to that one. Hope that helps. Okay. Well, thank you so much for everyone for tuning in. This has been really enjoyable. Maybe I'll do it again sometime. Like do some more live Q&As. I will be back later this week because we have, after the first quarter moon comes through, it's a really interesting full moon this month. It's going to engage with Neptune. That should be a really powerful one, really close proximity to conjunction to Neptune coming up. So we'll check that one out for sure. Okay, everyone, you have a nice evening, and we'll talk again soon. Take care.